Picture this, it's 2007. You're blasting Linkin Park and Breaking Benjamin on your iPad Nano. First thing you do when you get home, you hop on your computer and play some MapleStory with your friends. Or maybe you decide to check out this little website called YouTube to watch the most hype Flash animations of all time to ever grace the internet. And not just any Flash animations, we're talking about MapleStory Flash animations. The YouTube MapleStory community was an absolute beast on this platform. Armed with BannedStory and Adobe Flash, young creators would just make the coolest stuff. Way bigger fandoms, like Undertale, would follow. But some of these early creators were already uploading videos hitting the hundreds of thousands, if not even 1 million mark for views. This niche within a niche pretty much ruled my earliest times on the internet. And I don't know why, but I still think about it. I'm starting a mini-series on this one really cool but really niche subculture on the internet. And while I can't talk about every animator, I'm definitely going to be talking about a few of the big ones. Part 1, we're going to dive into one of the biggest and most well-known series and talk a bit about the absolute GOAT who animated it all. Part 2, we're talking about a series that everybody loved but is so hilariously edgy. And in Part 3, we're going to talk about where this subculture is today and some of the absolute legends who are still keeping it alive. Put on those forbidden earrings because this is Maple Kombat by DeityZiex. Before we dive in though, just a little bit of background. People were already sharing small animations and visual novel style stories back in the day. The reason being is because of online resources like BannedStory. You can create your own custom characters or just recreate your character from in-game and then save it so you can use it in MS Paint or Adobe Flash. And so people were recreating their in-game characters and making small animations or Maple music videos, or MMVs as they were called. I might be focusing on the more boyish Flash style animations, but I don't want to overstate the creative work that many young women and many young men were sharing already on YouTube around this time. Some of these videos were already getting hundreds, if not thousands of views and would pull in the audience needed to make bigger videos like this more searchable on YouTube. Now, as for Dre, if you were active on YouTube MapleStory community, you knew who DeityZiex was. Even before his first animations, this man manifested hype. Already a respected member of the community, he was sharing videos on his guild, on Patrol, playing MapleStory, and just hanging out with some of the top-ranked players in the game. He also edited some of the most hype gameplay videos of all time. It would be him and his friends raiding at that time the strongest bosses into the game. And let me tell you, this video right here, MapleStory Heroes vs. Pianist, DeityZiex, with that Breaking Benjamin music blaring, it hits different. I'm going to avoid playing any licensed music in this video, but man, the late 2000s vibes here, unparalleled. This video dropped on YouTube in August of 2006 and is currently sitting at over 2 million views. Remember, YouTube was launched in 2005. I don't know the whole depth or history of YouTube, but Let's Plays and video game content really didn't start taking off until the 2010s. But even more hype than that was a Zachem raid video. MapleStory Heroes vs. Zachem DeityZiex Part 2, which of course no longer has the iconic Breaking Benjamin music on it because YouTube eventually started cracking down on copyrighted music. But hear me out. When I synced this with Until the End to watch as God intended, it was a religious experience. So of course, when Dre announced that he was doing sprite animations, people were hyped. Maple Kombat 1. And right off the bat, I need to point out the Chad energy of just having an animation for your own personal animation studio that you would use in every episode. Uploaded on June 1st, 2007, this 8-minute animation currently sits at 1.1 million views. The first episode in this series is pretty bog standard shonen stuff. A couple of goofy lads steal these forbidden artifacts, they then get superpowers, scrap it out for a bit, then Dre accidentally kills his best bud. It's just kind of the way these things go, right? I'm not going to go through it episode by episode or go through the entire story, but to summarize it, the person they stole these earrings from, Manji, would go on an unstoppable killing spree while Dre and his buddy, yes, Rizzo, his name is Rizzo, like the Rizzler, would need to be trained to harness the power of the earrings so they can stop him. A really simple story, but really effective for what it needed to be. This dude Manji is a straight up demon, and in the second episode pulls off my favorite trope in indie animation, the Madness Rampage. Get used to me talking about Madness Rampages. You're going to see a lot of them. When talking about Maple Kombat, I'm going to be talking about 5 things. 1, the animation, of course. 2, the random MapleStory characters. 3, the absolute kick-ass music. 4, the credit sequences. I'll explain. And 5, the tone. To start things off with animation, and this is going to sound like heresy, but Dre isn't actually the best animator in the community. Hear me out. But he still is one of the absolute GOATs though. The first Maple Kombat is pretty rough. It's a little bit sluggish, it uses a lot of animation loops, and the momentum is a bit off. It's still pretty awesome, and it was a big step up from what other people were doing at that time. What makes DeityZiex a great animator though, is how much better he gets, and more importantly, the collaboration that ends up happening to make this into this. As each episode goes on, he introduces new animation techniques, works with other artists to create custom sprites, and adds entirely new tools to his animation toolkit. By MK4, he's already going ham with Adobe After Effects, with this one segment here showcasing another Madness Rampage where they kill a bunch of dudes from the Matrix, because remember, this is the late 2000s. If your mid to late 2000s Flash animation didn't have a segment where you were killing a bunch of dudes wearing trench coats or suits, you were doing it wrong. Even the later episodes, in scenes with no fighting, you get to see these really subtle improvements from him and his team, separating different parts of the sprite to animate differently. A simple but very effective way to show this is check out this segment from episode 2. They're using the crawling sprite to make it look like they're flying. Compare that to MK8, where at this point they have a custom Superman flying asset. It was just awesome seeing these guys get better and better in real time. It's like the real shonen anime was just the animation techniques he learned along the way. Speaking about his friends, the hilarious part about watching all these old MapleStory animations is all the cameos from players that were a huge deal back then, but today you're like, who the hell are these people? If you made MapleStory animations, you always had your buddies co-star with you. It was just a thing you would do. Plus the cameos from other famous players or other animators, MK was full of that. Like very important characters who would just show up and be these epic figures, people with full backstories, struggles, motivations. And then the guy name would be Buttercast, because that's what his Xbox 360 gamertag was. Maple Kombat 2 was chock full of cameos. You had top-ranking players, guildmates, and this DJ dude here. He shows up a lot in Maple Kombat. In fact, he shows up in a lot of people's videos from time to time. It's almost like he's a very key player that we're going to have to loop back to sometime. Another person who would pop up frequently, especially later on, is DeityZiex. Or Zeiss? Mispronouncing things is my thing. He's another great animator who would eventually help Dre out with animation on the later episodes alongside some other folk. Anyways, Maple Kombat 2 ends with a cameo reveal so hype that to this day, men who were teenagers in the 2000s would be ready to fight the armies of Thanos as long as Breath from Breaking Benjamin was playing on a loudspeaker. Freaking iconic, man. For those of you who don't know, this is Tiger. He was at one point the top-ranked player on Global MapleStory's biggest server, Scania. He was an actual in-game celebrity. He becomes a very important part of the story, eventually turning evil and going Super Saiyan 4 before murdering other top-ranked players. Tiger is an interesting case, since he would actually stop playing the actual MapleStory and people would lose contact with him. But since he was already written into the animation, they would have to keep writing his character years after people stopped talking to the guy. Other players and friends would show up from time to time, usually to get murdered by Manji and Evil Tiger. The reveal for this was awesome too. After Tiger gets defeated by Manji and MK3, he shows up in the next episode with the Final Fantasy Sephiroth theme and goes on another murder spree. Peak cinema. And since we already got one Winged Angel playing, rewatching all the Maple Kombat episodes for research, and one part that was just hilariously aged, but also equally peak, has to be the music. Like I said, we're all in high school, so it's pop punk, new metal, post-punk, post-hardcore, you name it, right? I myself got Phobia, Billy Talent, 1, 2, and 3, but especially 2, Meteora, fucking Hybrid Theory. Those albums are playing in a loop on my head for basically an entire decade. DeityZiex basically took all my favorite albums and just made them the soundtrack of Maple Kombat. These episodes were stacked with so much hype music that would actually come around to bite him in the ass because he would actually start getting those early copyright claims. Early YouTube was kind of a shit show for copyrighted music. Creators would just play songs in their entirety. Once early copyright claims started being implemented, people's works ended up getting ruined. You wouldn't get copyright strikes, but you would just have your audio straight up removed from the entire video. This happened to DeityZiex, where we had to re-upload MK8 because the audio got shanked. I really want to avoid playing any copyrighted music here because I myself don't want to get an orbital strike from YouTube. But TV and video game music, I think that's fair game, right? This one edit from the beginning of MK2 using the cell theme, it's still hype. I don't know why I replayed it so many times as I did. During the credits to these episodes, which we'll get back to, they all had really long credits for some reason, but DeityZiex says this, contains strong references to the hit series Dragon Ball Z. Bro, you don't say. He then proceeds to credit 13 songs to Bruce Falconer because once again, this stuff is fire and you cannot go this hard without Dragon Ball Z music. Oh, and back to the topic of Linkin Park music, Maple Kombat 3 ends with straight up the Linkin Park What I've Done song. The exact same song played at the end of the first Bayformers movie that came out a month or so before. But it gets deeper though. A later episode would use bits of the score from 2007 Transformers. Because remember, we need to maintain that high level of standard of dope ass shit, and we're not settling for anything less here. Linkin Park would eventually come back together and provide a track for Arcane Season 2 with Heavy is the Crown. And yes, I am mentioning Arcane Season 2 and Maple Kombat in the same sentence. Game recognizes game. There's a constant through line of cool shit from small indie series like MK to series like Arcane. Like who's to say that the people who got inspired by Maple Kombat to try their hands at animation would eventually go on to animate at a professional level? At one point, in Maple Kombat 8, a piece from the Lord of the Rings series is used, and I have to respect the level of sincerity to use a Fellowship of the Ring theme in your Flash animations in the late 2000s. Because as I keep saying, if you're gonna go hard, you might as well go hard to the ultimate degree. So I need to briefly talk about the credit sequences because they're a really interesting artifact from this time on YouTube. A lot of animators would have their credits stretch for an unusually long time and actually fill a good percentage of the overall video. And it's not like they were useless either. There was actually filled with like song credits, animation credits, what tools they were using. But then you would find completely pointless stuff, like cast lists of characters that were just OCs made with BannedStory or just straight up NPCs from MapleStory. Each episode had that disclaimer that this was inspired by Dragon Ball Z, in case it wasn't obvious. But one positive aspect I really want to point out is how much time was spent shouting out and promoting other creators. Like how he shouts out DeityZiex and hey look, it's that sprite dude again. Dre says that they're the future of MapleStory animation, so they both gotta be big deals, right? And the thing is, both would actually help out and help animate later episodes of Maple Kombat. These credit sequences are just interesting because they're never used anymore, really. Most YouTube videos today end on an end screen, allowing you to link towards other videos. Maple Kombat came out even before they had the animation tools that were added and eventually removed. So if you had to end a video, you just ended it with a scrolling credit sequence and hopefully use that sequence as a call to action. Finally, let's talk about tone. Overall, the series would shift back and forth between epic, goofy, and dark as all hell. But there was still a certain level of self-awareness and silliness that really tied it all together. Like everything shown here was sincere and created by people who gave a shit. But they also knew they were working with goofy MapleStory sprites and were not afraid to crack some juvenile humor before breaking into the most peak battles ever put into Adobe Flash. Maple Kombat would get a little more serious as it went on. They would introduce sort of like darker elements, perhaps conspiracy, shit would get violent, but it was still really fun to watch, right? Unlike a certain short, which I'm gonna have to talk about later. Maple Kombat knew what it was, had bits of levity, but if it wanted to get serious, it got serious. Because even if this was all still goofy MapleStory stuff, it's still a way for the creators to kind of practice with sort of writing more serious moments. Things started to get seriously dark towards the end though. An epic showdown, years in the making, between the boys and Manji. But of course we're going to drop a couple of fart jokes in there, fuck yeah. But Maple Kombat 8 left on a huge cliffhanger in 2012. The series never actually concluded. And honestly, most of these small projects never did. It was sort of a recurring element of early online animation. It was just a product of people growing up. Sometimes you're just not able to see how the story ends. Except, picture this. It's May 2019. The world is locked down to a certain thing that's in the air. We're all at home, isolated to our computers. Then all of a sudden, this pops up onto your YouTube feed. Years after the last episode of Maple Kombat, these absolute chads dropped Maple Kombat 9 with some of the most insane animation that MapleStory animations have ever seen. We have hit levels of hype beyond humanly possible. There is no cinema on the planet that is worthy of this piece of animation. MK9 goes balls to the walls with its action. The callbacks to iconic moments from literal decades before. It took us more than 10 years to see the epic battle between Manji, Dre, and the Rizzler. When the world needed them most, DeityZiex returned. DeityZiex returned, and he animates this awesome segment where he just rescues people from certain death. Mostly, fucking Tiger, the character, not the player, returns. Like, this character, who was originally a player cameo, turned evil but then disappeared from the scene. They gave him a character arc. Shit has hit the fan in this episode. We got this conclusive battle. Meanwhile, this army of monsters is going around just killing people. And just as things are getting truly bleak, the DJ dude appears again. And this time he brings with him a goddamn madness rampage. Let me finally introduce you to the most core character in this entire series and MapleStory animation as a whole. This is SpriteFan2. He animates his own segment, slaying a bunch of monsters, having a moment of levity between all this insane combat. He'll get his own video because SpriteFan2 Lord goes deep. At this point, there are multiple animators working on this project. There are also some figures working on special effects, custom sprites, like this is a team effort at this point. And before I end things off, I really just got to shout out to everybody who worked on this. This is just so cool to see again, even pop up back in 2019 out of all times. And so that was Maple Kombat. We still don't have an episode 10, and I can honestly live with that. Like I said, these things don't always get concluded, and that's okay. I think it set that perfect tone towards both silly, but also epic. The creators were able to write in some more serious moments, and I think they're well earned. Maple Kombat is heavily steeped in that 2000s Greece. But there's a reason why people keep coming back to it. There's a reason why people got together to animate later episodes. This wasn't the only sort of big Maple animation series, but it was definitely the biggest. But what happens when you animate a series that is by all means also amazing? But not only do you not get the tone right, you also get setback after setback of bad luck. We talked about having that old 2000s cheese, but what happens if you're still stuck on that old 2000s edgelord behavior? And for that, I say, stay tuned for part 2. So please make sure you like and subscribe, because things are about to take shape as we head off to Camp Piggy Pie. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.